Coming all the way from Atlanta, Georgia in the JSAC STEM Research Center. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the JSAC STEMcast. For those of you who are relatively new, the goal of this podcast is to get people interested in STEM and show that science, technology, engineering, and math are all around us, and the possibilities in a STEM career are endless and increasing every day. If you're asking yourself, what is JSAC? Don't worry. JSAC stands for the Johnson STEM Activity Center. Our mission is to empower students from diverse and underserved communities through exposure to science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and to teach them leadership skills to change the world. Hello, everyone. My name is Sophia Huynh, and I will be today's guest host. I'm a rising freshman at Columbia University this fall, and I love to dissect the questions of how and why. Sometimes these questions might lead us to existential crises, but it's still fascinating to discover a little bit more about ourselves and how we have become who we are now in this moment. In doing so, today's guest and I will delve into the study of ourselves, society, and DEI, which for those of you who don't know, stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. As these topics influence all people, we will discuss how DEI can be linked to STEM, and maybe even how we can partake in social justice as well. Today's guest has 27 years of experience in teaching and diversity leadership. He is a gifted motivator and educator who combines real-world topics with academic rigor to make learning personally meaningful for his students. Conducting workshops at numerous conferences across the nation, he is also currently the Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion at the Paideia School in Atlanta, Georgia, as well as a teacher of sociology. He's a community resource serving as a consultant to various entities in the country and has delivered keynotes and program content at the Bell Hooks Institute, Georgia Gwinnett College, and various schools and corporate institutions. He is also, most importantly, a loving husband and father, as well as an active Star Wars fan. Give it up for Oman Frame. Hi, Oman.
You got me again. We'll get into the game later, but hi, welcome. Thank you.
Yes,
It is an absolute pleasure and honor to be here.
So we're going to start off. So can you explain what DEI is, not only what it means literally, diversity, equity, and inclusion, but the concept of DEI itself?
Yeah, that's actually I love how we're starting with that question, because oftentimes what happens is that people don't understand that diversity, equity, and inclusion is the multi-layers of existing in systems. So you have any space that you go to is diverse. You could have a homogenous group of people. They're still diverse on multiple levels. So that's like the introduction way. If you want to have a diverse space, you create a space in which anyone and everyone is a part of it. Equity is a little bit different, because what it's telling you from a systems standard is we're going to give all people who are involved in this the same ability to rise and to be critiqued as everyone else. So we're setting the same line. And inclusion is actually one that is intentional. It's where you actually actively look at how your perspective is being shaped by others. So the example I often like to use is if you have a male-dominated space where you're homogeneously male or male-presenting, having the perspectives of women and people non-binary, you actually get more introspection as to what can be changed and what can be improved.
Yeah, so why is DEI so important? You touched a little bit on that, but in a more general, broad sense, I guess.
Yeah, in a broad sense, DEI is important. It's because that's who we are. As humans, when we interact with each other on a systems base, we actually we have to be able to bring our full selves to the conversation. And when that happens, you find thriving and success. And that's critical to any system. So, I think about like how it implies with STEM, which I know we're going to talk about later. It's like when you feel seen and heard for who you are on all the levels and layers of your humanity, you want to do better.
Definitely. So what does DEI mean to you as a person?
To me as a person, it means seeing beyond the visage, seeing right beyond what you would normally come into contact with, and actually taking the time. And I think, Sophia, we talked about this as just in general, taking the time to actually get to know someone and know what their strengths are, and at the same time acknowledging where their strengths can help where you are challenged. And it's like accepting people for the kind of frail humans that we are. No one is perfect, and we're not striving for a level of quote unquote perfection. We're striving for a level of understanding of who we are and what our gifts will bring.
Yeah, that was very good. On the top of your head, what are the 3 words that you describe your own work in DEI?
So for my work, I actually tie 3 distinct words to it. One is justice, because it's a just world in which we live in by nature. And so if we can replicate that in any system, then we're actually going to find that we all thrive. The other one is belonging. I think about the way that I use belonging in that is because when you are at a family function, this is my analogy. If you're at a family function and someone's not there, everyone knows that they're not there, and it's intentional. So you're saying, you belong to us. We have to do this together. And when you're not there, we're missing something. So if you can create an environment in which everyone belongs, the system will actually work for everyone, and no one will be lacking of anything. And that's the most important one to me. And the third one is empathy, because if we can sit down and understand people's differences and what they may be going through, and not try to fix it or change what they are, but just sit with them, it actually pulls us in a direction of caring about what we do.
So there's so many people in social justice. Who are some of your role models?
So ironically, I have 3 big ones that are historical that I've kind of modeled my justice work after and diversity work after. But then the principal one to me is our students, students who are taking the ball and taking it to the next level. Because for me, I look at like Yuri Kochiyama and James Baldwin and Cesar Chavez as leaders at that point and doing this work in a very intentional way, as well as stepping outside of their own rough identity. But I also look at the way that they motivated, and they didn't motivate people on a kind of parallel level. They actually looked at the people coming up. And that's kind of what I do. That's why I started teaching, because I know that I'm turning 50 this year. When I was 17, 18, I had ideas, but in the 80s and 90s, people didn't really accept those ideas as whole. So for me, my heroes are people like you, honestly. Like, you are someone I can't wait to see what they do. My students in class, it's like I can't wait to see what they actually do, because the potential for their humanity as well as their brilliance, like, I don't think that's something that's often touched, is kids have a brilliance, and students especially coming up in this age of information, have a brilliance that needs to be really cultivated. So yes, you are my hero.
Thank you. I'm very honored. So what advice would you give someone who might be interested in DEI work? Maybe they're not only just students, maybe it's someone who's just there every day, Yeah,
so that's another fabulous intro, because what I would first say is start with yourself. I would say, it's kind of like that Field of Dreams quote: if you build it, it will come. If you do the work around understanding your biases, and that's not to say that you look at something as a bad thing. It's like, I am biased against whatever, and I have to look at what that is and untangle that. Because we're all affected by these systems. That's the first step. The second step I would say is find people that you trust, that are trying to have honest conversations. And from there, it's learning. So in that vein, that's why I think schools are critical, because if we can allow kids to be seen for who they are, they can make choices and gravitate to other folks. And that mass becomes bigger around finding what justice and belonging actually looks like. So like, those are the 2 things. And then the third I would say is to Google places to actually get involved. So like, step 1 would be finding local parts of your community or city that you can be involved in and ask hard questions. As you said earlier, you like to find out the why. So it'd be something like, why does Why does my school principal, here's a great one. Why are most of my school teachers women? Why can't we think about ways to include more male identifying people in our classrooms? Why are men, especially in public school systems, go from the classroom to the administration to the superintendent so fast? How can we find, those are questions. It's always good to ask essential questions, which is what you alluded to at the beginning.
Definitely.
It's why you're my hero, my Shiro.
Thank you. Are there any limitations to DI work? A lot of times when you look at different careers, if you ask for advice, they say, definitely don't do X, Y, and Z. Do you have any advice for that?
Yes. For anyone that's looking at what the issues that come up with DEI work, one is a closed or set mindset. I tell people all the time when I do both conversations with my kids, and we've talked about this before, is you never know everything. And it's also good to understand what you don't know. So that's the only real limitation in doing this work, is to never walk into a space and think you know everything. Because what ends up happening is you're reminded really quickly that you don't. And then it's dealing with that self-empathy of saying, I messed up, I don't know, I'm just going to stop, which is a very traditionally Western idea versus, thank you for pointing that out. Thank you for pointing out my patriarchal overtones. Thank you for pointing out the fact that I speak over, thank you. Because if we can get to that space, what ends up happening is that we realize we're human again. And that's the biggest limitation. And I see that happening. People think they know everything, and that's when it can stop. Yeah,
definitely. So when you look you were talking before, when you look at yourself first, it's easier for you to be open-minded to get even more information.
And the self-inquiry, I think, is so important that as young people, you really question, who am I? And, I try to tell my students as well as my children, ask yourself who you are every single day. And if the answer is the same, ask it again, because if you can say who you are with one sentence, it's probably pretty surface. The 7-year-old is very funny about it because she wakes up and I'm fierce. I'm this. I'm that. The 13-year-old is like, I'm tired. I'm like, okay, I love you both. Thank you for being honest.
Definitely. So how does your work in DEI influence how you teach?
That's a huge point of a weird discovery, because at first I didn't realize that I thought that I had to be perfect. So I, tried to do my best, and I have severe learning differences. So I'm dyslexic and I have wicked ADD. And the self-harm, mental self-harm that I did to myself, as well as the school systems in terms of how I learn did with me, was really, that was hard. And so in the way that I teach, I try to recognize that not every kid is a pen and pencil learner. So what I do in teaching is try to understand kids in the learning relationship. And it's funny because I've taught in both urban environments as well as in, privileged private schools. So what I've seen is when you go into those urban environments, they say, they're going to walk all over you. Those kids are going to eat you alive. And it's their bias and prejudice that says that. And I say there as in administration and other teachers. And what ends up happening is, of course, the first couple weeks are hell. It's crazy. But then they start to understand what trust and relationships look like. And by the end of the year, they're doing everything I ask, not because I'm demanding they do it, but because I ask them to do it. And our relationship is secure. So my goal is to also not deny the fact that I can learn way more from students than they can from me. There's 20 or 30 kids in the room. I'm almost one. So my perspective has to be open. So that's how I bring it pretty much in the classroom, is just consistently reminding myself that there are humans in this space that have a lot to offer as well.
How has your own life experiences shaped how you view DEI as a whole?
So as I was just saying in the last question, being someone who learns different, as growing up as a larger than average Black man, who had so many different interests that did not kind of stereotypically fall within the realm of, I was not that great at basketball. I didn't do the stereotypical stuff. I was more nerdy. Like loved Star Wars, but I also loved all the other stuff around The Hobbit and another science fiction stuff. But what was interesting is I couldn't really read it. So I had to do, I would be outside and active as much as possible. Because that was me. And it's funny, I would run away from the academic stuff because of self-shame. And for me, I think what it did is it really influenced how I see a pathway for those kind of the land of the land of misfit toys. I was in that land. So like what I end up doing is trying to say that in my 50 plus years on this planet, hopefully I go more than 50. I want to make sure that there's a space for every kid. And that goes back to like the equity piece is if the kid that has a hard time reading gets work or gets support so that they can read, everyone in the class, the kid that's a super advanced reader can already do that. So it just rising tides lift all boats. So I think the other piece to it is, I'm lucky to have a family that was very supportive and creatively supportive. So, they didn't just say you have to do the work. They said, how do you want to do the work? Or what makes you happy about doing the work? And all families provide a level of boundaries that sometimes can create pain and touch points. But I think one of the things that I was able to do was to recognize and struggle out of a path that I thought they wanted to do. And I think that's the biggest gift that my parents gave to me, which I think, my partner and I were trying to give to our kids. So with us, I think, shout out to Naima, Soraya, and Uchenna. We are trying to make sure that our kids are seen for who they are because, I had to unwind and untangle probably 18 years of self-inflicted trauma around learning. And so I want to be that for kids. And I want to be a space where kids can actually feel safe. So.
Yeah. So now we're talking about life experiences. You actually have an amazing story to tell about your own personal life experiences.
Yes.
So listeners might not know this, but a few years ago, Oman actually went through an open heart surgery.
Yep.
So can you kind of tell us the story of that process, what went through the operation, maybe even like how STEM was included in that?
Oh my God, yes. Okay, so a lot of people are wigged out when I tell the story because I'm so excited about it. So yes, 2017, I basically had a pretty massive illness that was ironically an infection because I don't process strep the way you process strep or the way most of you process strep. I don't get sore throats. I don't get sick. But the strep virus can actually, or the strep bacteria can do damage to my body. And it basically has been doing it most of my life. But in 2017, I basically was a walking time bomb. My aortic valve was basically the strep and staph bacteria attached itself to one of the leaflets in my aortic valve and basically destroyed it. And through a lot of testing, and big shout out to my doctors and the medical team at Ponce Primary, it's like the people, and Emory, I actually, they caught it. And the story that I like to tell is a student caught it because I went in and I'm a healthy person. I don't smoke, don't drink, no drugs, all that stuff. And I'm active. So they're going, wait a second, what's going on? And the symptoms were I was lethargic beyond belief. Like I would sleep all night. Then I would sleep from 12 to 3 in my classroom because I didn't teach, but I'd be doing work and I'd fall asleep. And then I'd sleep from 6 to 8. And then I'd go back to bed at 9. Like it was this really crazy thing. And I was taking way too many Advil, way too many times. Like I was on 6 Advil 4 times a day. And that's bad for horrible for your body, but that's the only way I could stay alive, basically. And so I walked in and they went through all the tests. I'll never forget this. They went through, oncology, ophthalmology, rheumatology. They went through every department. And then the last two, which is ironic because they thought that I had cancer in my brain because I had these massive lesions in my brain. And they were like, we know it's probably this. So they booked them at the end of the day. But right before them, they're like, yeah, we'll just throw cardiology in. It's probably not his heart. I mean, the dude is, And so when they did, they're checking my heart. And one of the one of the students, the med students at Emory, because it's a teaching hospital, heard something that the professor and the doctor didn't. Because kids have better hearing than adults, even trained ears. And so, he rushed out and then they got all this stuff. And then all the things happened after that. So they did a heart catheter, scan. Well, like not a scan, but they basically inserted a catheter in my vein up to my heart and took a picture and saw all this stuff. And they're like, oh my goodness, this is bad. And then I was rushed into surgery. So they split my chest, cracked my sternum, pulled it out. And they realized that the aortic valve was almost completely destroyed. And they put in, and this is where the stem comes in that's wicked cool, because when you have a valve replacement, they ask two things. They ask you one question. And my thoracic surgeon, Dr. Leschnauer, was like, you want a pig valve or do you want a mechanical? And he was dead. Like, he was so excited. And I was like, I'm ready to do this. I was like, what are the limitations? And the pig valve or the natural valve will wear out. It's just like another piece of art, of nature. And it's interesting because they're trying to grow this. And this is where it comes in, because they're trying to grow new valves and they're getting better at it. But the mechanical valve, which I think it's carbon fiber, I know, but I think it's 3D printed. I'm not sure exactly, will last forever. Like, it will last outside of my life. And there are limitations that go either way. So I have this, beautiful, incredibly well-designed machine that someone actually had to take all this stuff into consideration to build and to perfect. And it's really interesting because, like, to this day, I do this activity with younger kids especially, but with older kids and adults, it's more fun because younger kids can actually hear the frequency of the click in my heart. Most adults can't. And it goes to show how the hearing is better and we need to rely on kids. So yeah, then, they zip me back up. I got a lightsaber tattoo underneath my scar. So it's a trip because every single day, every moment, I hear this click in my head. And the way that makes me think about how STEM is involved is, what could we be missing by not making this a priority? And especially not making it a priority with the other subjects that we teach, and athletics and arts, because all those, it's a beautiful machine that's in my chest. Someone didn't just go and point it out. It's actually, they thought about the design. They thought about what it looked like, even though no one will ever see it. So to me, it's like that whole process of STEM research and STEM the beautification of STEM is important, because if we leave these kids out, if we leave these kids from underserved communities out, they have ideas and creativity that it falls into the systemic deficit model that we think about with underserviced kids. But if you go to an underserviced community, they have games that have nothing. They've made up games. They've made up action figures, action roles with, tin cans. Why can't we harvest that creativity and that intellect? That's my story.
It's really fascinating. So in your job, you actually teach a very specific STEM subject, which is sociology. So for those listening who might not know, what is sociology?
So sociology is the study of society. It's the scientific study of society. So there's the same things that you would do in a STEM course. So you would research, you would do data analysis, you would do trends, and you would do hypothesis around societal trends. So right now, there's a whole field of sociological study looking at why it took us this long to make STEM so important, which is truly phenomenal, because I'm thinking, wait a minute, society actually has improved something that we needed to be doing a long time ago, because now it makes sense that we've got everyone at the table. I mean, I think about how when you look at the history of science and math, how oftentimes women were excluded from the conversation. When there are people like Katherine Johnson and other people who got us technologically farther, and even still, the what did we miss? And I want to be very clear about being proactive. We can lament all the things that happened. Okay, there's a time for that. But what are we doing to make it change in the future? And I don't want to get stuck in the past. I would love to say, that's awesome. So why don't we find ways to include first of all, change our perspective and say, oh my goodness, when I'm talking about the next astronaut, or when I'm talking about the next math professor or math genius, I got to think, what will she look like? Will she wheel herself into the classroom? It's like all these things, because who knows? I think, and there's a commercial out now that's got a whole lot of, changes. And it's like, for me, it's like I like watching basketball, but I like watching the WNBA and women's college basketball because it's a more pure game. And like, I can't find jerseys that fit me, and I want to wear those jerseys. And it'll be we'll know we've gone somewhere when, as the commercial states, the WNBA and the NBA are on par salary wise, and people watching it, as well as that's the coolest thing about the Olympics. You're watching more women and more women from around the country who've got totally different stories really participate. I hope that connected it.
Definitely,
okay.
Definitely.
I'm sorry, and I just realized, because sociology is for us to actually look at how our society works, and that's the system.
Yeah, so in science, a lot of the common debate, a really common debate is nurture versus nature, right? So basically, if you don't know, the question is basically, are our identities, our personalities, and ourselves shaped more by nature, so biology, our biological, our genes, and all that stuff, or nature, so the influences around them? So when we're talking about sociology, in this case, society itself.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on that?
So mine is actually a healthy balance. I think that all humans are brilliant. I think that our geniuses are not recognized enough. So that's the nature part. It's how do we categorize where their genius fits in our systems. And then I think it's nature, because just as if you go anywhere and the language being spoken, whatever it is, the language being spoken is learned through experience. So if you drop someone off in, South America, and they're speaking a native indigenous language, the longer you live there, the more you'll pick that up, even if you don't know from the beginning. So like the nature around how everything's working like that is really important. And I think the nurture is, and what you have is that genius. It's like we have the ability to do that adaptation. So I think it's like a healthy balance.
As a teacher, you equip your students with the knowledge that they can use in the future, right? They're almost like weapons. So when you're tying sociology, DEI, and education together, a lot of people talk about the need for educational equity. So what is educational equity for those people who might not know? And what are some of the steps that we can take to help pursue it?
So educational equity is providing the same level of access across the board. It is saying things like, we should not ever have a classroom that has outdated materials. Period. It's like, how do we do that? We got to look societally and systemically at how can we restructure things so that this basic thing can be accessible for everyone. So I think about resources as the first thing. It's like, a lot of people, well, I shouldn't say a lot of people. There are very few people who have a lot of access to resources. If we were to flip that paradigm and say that there were a lot of people that had access to, a large amount of people that had access to a fair amount of resources, well, then what could we gain from that? So like that level of educational equity is important to me because, public school funding, as well as the system on which it's built, oftentimes based on property tax and whatnot, this is just through the sociological lens, is skewed. Because if you're in an affluent neighborhood, which pays higher property tax, well, then your school's going to be better funded. And that's what some of the emergence of charter schools have done, is being able to ask for a certain allotment per pupil, which changes the game because it changes how you spend your money. And unfortunately, we are in a system that does use the financial system as a way of, that's the circulatory system for me. It's like the brain can't work without blood. It's like, schools can't work without funding. Even though sometimes we have to ask ourselves, what is that funding for? And how do we allocate that? That's the first thing. And what are the steps? I mean, the first step, I think, Sophia, is for students to understand that their voice matters and that they have a say in how this can shape up. And so it's like, if you're in an underserved community, make waves, ask questions, ask why the textbooks are so old, get your parents involved, even if they can be involved in getting you to the place. They don't have to let you take the lead. And it's like, that's my, one of my pinnacles is empowering students to do this work. Because number one, you have way more energy, you are way smarter, and you have the time. Most adults are dealing with adult issues, but if we get this off our plate and let kids be a part of it, well, then it changes things. I mean, I think about names. It's an easy way to start. Educational equity, any teacher out there listening, ask your children how they want to be addressed. Ask how they pronounce their name. How do you say it? What makes you feel safe? What are ways in which I can talk to you that make you feel safe? Some people, if I yell at them, that's the only way they'll kind of respond, because that's what they're used to. And then we can go backwards on that. Then there are other kids who, like if you go back to my story, I can't tell you how many times my name is spelled O-M-A-N. How many teachers that called me Omar, even though they knew, and colleagues I'm like, okay, so I know coming in, okay, geez. It's like, it's a mosquito. Like you're always scratching at it. It's a mosquito bite when you don't feel comfortable. So like that's one way that any of you can do this. Students watching this, talk, speak up. You raise your voice. Even introverts, you have this amazing ability to be introspective and reflective that is critical to understanding how we're going to get better and through this. So it's like, use your voice. Most introverts, and this is something I'm so amazed by. Well, not amazed, but it's inspired by. They can write like there's no tomorrow. That's a pathway to getting stuff done. So to me, that's educational equity is a critical part of addressing how we change the world.
Yeah, you brought up the name thing. So the name thing I think is really interesting as well, because I know for a fact that a ton of students relate with that. Even me personally, right? So especially in the public school system or in the school system, when people constantly, even after you correct your name, it's like a psychological thing, right?
Yes.
Because you're pulling up, so you have the power of authority, right? Mm-hmm. But they're constantly getting your name wrong. And even sometimes you might feel like it's not worth it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So just being able to confront yourself and confront other people and like, here's how I want to be addressed. Mm-hmm. That changes the whole game.
Oh, I mean, I can tell you, like, I can give you some backstories around students I've had who their name was totally, because it was a different language and a different dialect, the inflection was different. Mm-hmm. So they're saying something, and it's a hurtful way of saying their name. And they didn't know. The teacher didn't know. And and this was a student, he was a fifth grade student. And when you pronounce his name wrong, it's like shame. And he finally he was a very quiet kid. He finally came up to me and told me what was happening, because he was having a bad day. And it was like, this is in a classroom of 30 kids and he's an introvert, but he's lashing out. Mm-hmm. And then I'm like, what's going on? And he goes, they all make me feel like I'm dumb and I'm not smart. And I'm like, well, who? Do I, I asked, first started with me, like, do I do that? And I was like, he's like, no. I was like, because if I do, and I might, please let me know. I'm not perfect. And he said, no, this teacher did. And I was like, well, what are they doing? And he said, they're pronouncing my name wrong. And I was like, well, what does that mean? How does that feel? He's like, well, the way they pronounce it is when I'm in trouble. That's how my family pronounces it that way. And I was like, so they're always he's like, I hear it like I'm always in trouble. And I went and I said, you need to go talk to this teacher. And I'm scared. And if I talk to this teacher, my parents are going to be mad because I can't, I can't challenge the authority. I said, it's okay. I'll be with you. And he goes, okay. So he walks to the teacher. We sit down, and he's a great student. But I said, I said to this teacher, I said, you need to listen because you all need to talk. And so I sat in the back. I physically sat behind him to give him back. And he looked down, and I was like, look them in the eye. I was like coaching him through it. And he did. And he said, you pronounced my name wrong. And the kid felt so empowered because the teacher was like, I am so sorry. Before anything else, like, I apologize. Oh my gosh, how come you didn't tell me earlier? Blah, blah. And he was just like, thank you. That's all. If you can pronounce it right, that would be awesome. And they said, yeah, okay, cool. And from that point forward, but the change in the kid was immediate. I mean, he felt like everyone heard. And then what was really awesome was that teacher told the other teachers in the fifth grade, and it became a school-wide thing so that everyone knew, and he just changed. And over the course of fifth, sixth, seventh grade, different kid.
Yeah, so it can make a ton of impact, the one thing.
Mm-hmm.
So in your opinion, how can people use STEM in order to work on DEI issues, and maybe even touching on sociology, of course?
Oh, I think the one thing that's really powerful is that for STEM, the one thing people can do is try. That's the overarching piece to STEM for me is you're not going to get it right the first time. So practicing making mistakes is huge. So for most, and I say this to the viewing audience, is try something. Go try to fix something before you call and replace it. Figure it out, tinker with things. And that is important because what it ends up doing is it turns everything from a throwaway disposable object to something that has value and can be repaired. And the second thing is, how it ties in with sociology is you are now challenging the system, because now you're saying when you see something that is not working, instead of getting rid of it, like I think so many people are like, let's just get rid of this. Let's get rid of that system. Let's get rid of, it's funny because oftentimes when conversations around defunding the police happen, they're so much caught in the throwaway mentality that they're not reading what really means. They're not actually taking the time to say, no, it's not like give them no funding. It's like, how can we train this group, the system, to actually help instead of to be one reacting on pain? And like, that's a whole socio-political conversation. But like, if we were to say, why don't we invest in healthcare? Instead of like we don't talk about defunding healthcare. We would talk about let's refund healthcare or let's refund education. That would change the paradigm. Imagine if it was a system where, the budget that we gave to the law enforcement was given to education. Like, and it's neither is perfect, but it's a question. We can ask those questions and sit with them genuinely, see what they pan out to be. So that's the main thing. And I think that other piece is just practice making mistakes and owning how that feels, because we're so caught up as a society around doing it right versus just doing it, So I think those are the two areas that if we were to talk about how STEM and sociology come together with changing and fixing our world, that's it. It's okay to make a mistake, even a big one. I tell people all the time, behind every mistake is an opportunity for you to grow.
Yeah, so for our last question, a lot of the viewers, it's very STEM-based, mm-hmm. right? So if they're trying to pursue a STEM career, why is diversity and achieving diversity in a STEM field and STEM careers so important?
Because it's an infinite field. I mean, so many people are pigeoned into one aspect of, science or engineering. Well, in the engineering field, there's thousands of different applications. So the more people we get into that conversation, the more access we have, that means the more different levels that can happen. I mean, I think about when you talk about the mathematics and the science behind video games, and we're talking about artificial intelligence, you're talking about a whole section of the world that actually can do so much with it because of the consumption. I mean, you're talking about under-resourced communities and underserved communities. they still are invested in video games, technology, because that's a part of our fabric now. Why aren't we asking that group of people how we can improve for them and getting them involved? So like, to me, the STEM field is wide open if we are to look at it not from a perspective of you have to have a certain grade point average mathematically, but you can build things with your hand. I think trade schools are another huge piece that we miss because, I love the fact that, kids go to these incredible institutions, but they don't know how to clean up. It's like, that's a part of, it's messy. We got to get messy with science. And to me, STEM does that. STEM education allows kids to be messy.
Well, thank you so much, Oman. It was great talking to you.
No problem. It's always an honor. And if you ever see this kid out in the wild, just be lucky, because she's amazing. And I'm like, I'm trying to fit this in so you can't edit it out. If you ever want a Sophia Huynh cheering squad, I'm always in your corner, kid.
Yes, of course. Well, stay tuned for our next episode, and goodbye.
Bye.